Today we're diving into one of the most fascinating and unexpected stories in the Bible, the story of Balaam and his donkey. It's a powerful lesson about obedience, spiritual awareness, and how God can use the most unlikely of messengers to guide us. If you're excited to learn about this ancient story and the life-changing lessons it holds, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss out on our future videos. Let's get into it. The story of Balaam and his donkey is one of the most fascinating and profound stories in the Old Testament. Is found in the book of Numbers, chapter 22, from verses 21 to 39. It takes place during the time when the Israelites were journeying through the wilderness on their way to the Promised Land. As the Israelites camped near Moab, the king of Moab, Balak, was terrified because he had heard about the great victories Israel had won over neighboring nations. In desperation, Balak sought to weaken Israel by hiring a man named Balaam, a non-Israelite prophet, to curse the people of Israel. Balak believed that if Balaam cursed Israel, they would be more vulnerable and Moab might defeat them. Balak sent messengers with gifts to Balaam, requesting that he come and curse Israel. However, after consulting God, Balaam told the messengers that he could not curse the people whom God had blessed. The messengers returned to Balak, but the king, determined to secure Balaam's help, sent higher-ranking officials with even more enticing offers. Balaam asked God again, and this time God permitted him to go, but with a condition. Balaam was to only speak the words that God put in his mouth. Despite the warning, Balaam was tempted by the promise of wealth and prestige. As he set off on his journey, God's anger burned against him because his heart was not fully obedient. On the journey to Moab, Balaam was riding his donkey when something unusual happened. The angel of the Lord stood on the road with a drawn sword, blocking their way. Balaam, however, could not see the angel. His donkey, on the other hand, saw the angel and responded by refusing to proceed. The donkey turned off the road into a field to avoid the angel. Balaam, frustrated and unaware of the angel's presence, struck the donkey to get her back on the road. The angel appeared again, this time in a narrow path between two vineyards. The donkey pressed against the wall, crushing Balaam's foot. Angry, Balaam struck her once more. The angel stood in a narrow place where there was no way to turn. The donkey, seeing no escape, lay down under Balaam. Furious, Balaam struck the donkey again with his staff. Then something extraordinary happened. God opened the donkey's mouth, and she spoke to Balaam, asking, "What have I done to you to make you beat me these 3 times?" Balaam, instead of being shocked by a talking donkey, responded in anger, saying, "You have made a fool of me. If I had a sword in my hand, I would kill you right now." The donkey replied, reminding Balaam that she had always served him faithfully and had never acted this way before. Balaam then realized that something unusual was happening. At that moment, God opened Balaam's eyes, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the road with a drawn sword. Balaam bowed down and fell face down in fear. The angel rebuked him, saying, "Why have you beaten your donkey these 3 times? I have come to block your way because your path is a reckless one before me. The donkey saw me and turned away. If she had not, I would have killed you and spared her." Humbled, Balaam confessed his sin and offered to return home. However, the angel instructed him to continue on his journey, but again emphasized that he could only speak the words God put in his mouth. When Balaam finally arrived in Moab and met Balak, he attempted to curse Israel, as the king requested. However, each time Balaam opened his mouth to speak, God turned his curses into blessings. Balaam ended up blessing Israel instead of cursing them, much to Balak's frustration. The story of Balaam and his donkey is a powerful demonstration of God's absolute control over every situation, even when people or forces try to oppose his will. In this story, God's sovereignty is demonstrated in how he overrules Balaam's intentions. Although Balaam was a prophet, his heart was swayed by the promise of personal gain. He was enticed by the wealth and honor that Balak, the king of Moab, offered in exchange for cursing the Israelites. Despite Balaam's willingness to go along with Balak's plan, God intervened at every step to ensure that Balaam could not act against his divine purposes. This highlights a key aspect of God's sovereignty, which is his ability to direct the course of events according to his will, regardless of human intentions. Balaam, though initially resistant, was eventually forced to acknowledge that he could only speak the words God put in his mouth. Another lesson to learn from this story is God's use of unlikely instruments. One of the most striking aspects of the story of Balaam and his donkey is how God chose to communicate through such an unexpected and humble instrument, a donkey in this case. The fact that God used an animal, often seen as lowly and stubborn, to deliver a divine message reveals a profound truth about how he works. God is not limited by human expectations or norms when it comes to accomplishing his purposes. In this case, a talking donkey became the means through which God conveyed his warning to Balaam, an event that defied natural laws and caught Balaam completely off guard. This is to let us know that God can use anyone or anything to fulfill his will. Just as he used a donkey to open Balaam's eyes to the angel blocking his path, God can use the most unexpected situations, people, or even obstacles in our lives to get our attention or redirect us. We often expect God to speak to us in certain ways, like through prayer, scripture, or other believers. But sometimes he chooses more surprising avenues. Whether through a person we least expect, a difficult circumstance, or even a moment of failure, God can use what appears insignificant or ordinary to achieve something extraordinary. The use of the donkey also teaches us an important lesson in humility. Balaam, the prophet, was spiritually blind in that moment, while the donkey, often considered a simple animal, was able to perceive the angel of the Lord. This reversal of roles is a humbling reminder that God's wisdom and power are far greater than our own, and that our position or knowledge doesn't exempt us from needing correction or guidance. Balaam, though a prophet, was so focused on his mission and personal gain that he missed what was right in front of him, which was God's warning. It took an animal to make him stop, reflect, and finally see the divine intervention. Another important lesson from the story of Balaam and his donkey is the danger of greed and how it can cloud our judgment, leading us away from God's will. Balaam's heart was divided between his desire to follow God's guidance and the temptation of wealth, status, and prestige offered by King Balak. Though Balaam sought God's will in his actions, his motives were tainted by the material rewards Balak promised if he would curse the Israelites. This internal struggle demonstrates how greed and personal ambition can subtly influence our decisions, even when we outwardly claim to seek God's direction. Balaam's initial refusal to curse Israel seemed righteous, but when Balak sent higher-ranking officials with greater promises of riches and honor, Balaam began to waver. He returned to God, asking once more for permission to go with Balak's messengers, even though God had already made his will clear. This reveals how greed can create spiritual confusion and blind us to what God has already spoken. Balaam's divided heart serves as a warning that when our desires are driven by selfish motives, whether for money, power, or recognition, our spiritual discernment can become compromised. This story illustrates a powerful truth. Greed not only distracts us from God's will, but can also lead us into disobedience and danger. Balaam's journey to curse Israel was a direct result of his inability to fully resist the lure of material gain, despite knowing it was against God's will. His desire for personal advancement overrode his initial obedience, causing him to persist in a path that God had warned him against. This is a vivid picture of how greed can cause us to compromise our values, pushing us further from the path of righteousness. When our motives are impure, it becomes easy to rationalize disobedience or to convince ourselves that what we're pursuing is God's will, even when it clearly isn't. Balaam wanted the rewards Balak promised so badly that he kept trying to find a way to achieve his goals without fully disobeying God. He wanted to serve two masters, God and his own ambitions. But Scripture teaches us that it is impossible to serve both God and money or worldly gain. Balaam's divided heart put him on a dangerous path, symbolized by the angel standing in his way, ready to bring judgment. Greed also blinds us to the warnings and signs that God places in our path. Balaam's focus on the rewards caused him to overlook the clear signs of God's displeasure. Despite the donkey's unusual behavior and the eventual confrontation with the angel, Balaam's mind was so set on the material benefits that he failed to recognize the seriousness of his situation. This shows us that when greed takes hold, it can make us oblivious to God's guidance, even when it is right in front of us. This lesson is incredibly relevant today, as we live in a world that constantly pushes us to pursue material success and personal gain. The story of Balaam is a reminder that when we allow greed, ambition, or the desire for status to drive our decisions, we are likely to stray from the path God has set for us. Greed can lead us to make choices that seem beneficial in the short term, but ultimately put us at odds with God's purpose for our lives. It's a dangerous force that can cause us to prioritize worldly rewards over spiritual integrity. Balaam's story serves as a cautionary tale about the power of unchecked greed. When we prioritize our own desires over God's will, we risk losing our way, falling into disobedience, and even bringing harm to ourselves and others. The story shows us the importance of keeping our motives pure, seeking to align our hearts with God's purposes rather than pursuing personal gain. It's a call to examine our hearts regularly, ensuring that our ambitions and desires are rooted in a sincere desire to serve and honor God rather than in a quest for wealth or status. True fulfillment and peace come from obedience to God, not from chasing after worldly rewards. Balaam's divided heart serves as a stark reminder that when we allow greed to take hold, it can lead us down a path of spiritual destruction, diverting us from the blessings and guidance that come from walking closely with God. The story of Balaam and his donkey highlights a profound lesson about spiritual blindness. Despite being a prophet, someone expected to have deep spiritual insight. Balaam was completely unaware of the angel of the Lord standing in his path. Ironically, his donkey, an animal regarded as simple and stubborn, was able to perceive the angel's presence and the danger Balaam was walking into. This contrast between Balaam's spiritual blindness and the donkey's heightened awareness reveals an important truth. Spiritual pride and stubbornness can blind us to God's interventions in our lives, while humility and openness can make us more sensitive to His presence and guidance. Balaam's blindness to the angel's presence was not physical, but spiritual. Although he had the role and title of a prophet, his heart was divided between obeying God and pursuing personal gain. His internal struggle for wealth and honor clouded his spiritual vision, preventing him from recognizing God's warning. This shows us that even those in positions of spiritual authority or with great knowledge of God can become blind to His work if their hearts are not fully aligned with Him. Balaam's blindness serves as a warning that our spiritual perception can be dulled when we allow pride, greed, or selfish desires to dominate our focus. Balaam's donkey, on the other hand, recognized the angel immediately and acted to protect him from harm. This reversal of roles teaches a humbling lesson. Sometimes those we consider less spiritual or less knowledgeable may have a clearer sense of God's presence than we do. The donkey's ability to see the angel, while Balaam remained oblivious, illustrates that God can use even the most unlikely of beings to reveal His truth and warn us when we're headed down the wrong path. This should remind us to never discount others, even those we might overlook or dismiss, as potential vessels of God's wisdom. Spiritual pride can be one of the main reasons for our blindness. Balaam was a prophet, someone who had experienced communication with God, but his spiritual pride may have made him overconfident in his ability to understand God's will. When we think we have everything figured out, we become less open to God's subtle warnings or unexpected interventions. In Balaam's case, his confidence in his role as a prophet and his desire for personal gain made him spiritually stubborn, ignoring the signs that something was wrong. He was so focused on his journey and his own agenda that he couldn't see the divine intervention happening right in front of him. This blindness can happen to any of us when we rely too much on our own understanding or when we become fixated on our plans and desires. We should take time to ask ourselves, is this what God would have me say? Does this reflect His love, truth, and purpose? By doing this, we ensure that our words carry God's wisdom and not merely our own limited perspective. Speaking only what God commands goes beyond just the words we say. It extends to our actions and decisions as well. Balaam was not just commanded to speak the right words, he was also instructed to act according to God's will. As Christians, this teaches us that our entire lives should be a reflection of God's truth, not just our words. Thank you for staying till the end and exploring the story of Balaam and his donkey. There's so much we can learn about God's patience, His protection, and how we should always be open to His guidance, even if it comes in unexpected ways. If this story resonated with you, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and share it with others who might benefit from these lessons. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories and insights from the Bible. Until next time, stay blessed and keep seeking the deeper meaning in life's everyday moments. See you in the next video.